dear brothers and sisters, when we start to look at the teachings of any faith, whether it be Christian, the Jewish, the Sikh, the Hindu faith, or any other faith, we find the teachings of love, to give love in all kinds of circumstances, comes out loud and clear in all of those teachings. Generally, we think of violence as being in action. We feel if we hit someone, we've been violent. If we kill someone, we've been violent. And it's very interesting that we leave violence till that level, and very rarely do we think about violence coming in words. Every day we might have interactions right in our families, between spouses. We might have interactions at our places of work. We might have interactions with others as we are driving, if someone's cutting our lane. We might have interactions in our neighborhoods, in our places of worship. And many times we find that words come out of us which bring pain or difficulties into the lives of many, many others. And so we don't take those words as being violence to someone else. When we start to think about the words, what's very interesting is that as the words come out of us, then those words have no way of getting back in. Once they've come out of us, then they're gone. They're gone in the atmosphere forever and ever and ever. And if we've said something slanderous about someone to someone else, then the words that we've said, just get repeated and repeated and repeated, and keep on circling more and more and more, and creating more difficulties and more pains. And when we look at our own lives, we find on a daily basis, in our interactions, with members of a family, as parents with the children, as young people with our siblings and friends, as children with our parents, as co-workers with each other, as friends, we have many interactions. That there's a lot of violence in the words that we use, because when something happens contrary to what we want it to be, then we get annoyed very, very quickly. Many times, we feel as if we have been harmed. And in that process, to make things correct, we retaliate. Now, when we look at the lives of the great saints and mystics, we find that even though they were persecuted and a lot of pain came into their lives, their prayer to God was always to forgive those for what they did, because they did not know what they were doing. That life and those teachings are in many, many traditions of the world. That's what true forgiveness is all about. Because when we don't forgive, then the pain stays with us. Let's say someone did something that was hurtful to you. Okay. Now, when you think about that pain, your pain becomes more and more and more. When you relive that situation, you get more pain into your being. You might in your head think of bad things about that person, but all of that pain and all that anger stays with you. They don't even know that you are doing that in a conscious manner, even though all thoughts are very important too. But the one who's being hurt is the one who's holding on to the pain. And so forgiveness is not for the other person. Forgiveness is for our own well-being. We think we're forgiving someone else. In reality, When we forgive someone, we are taking our pain and lessening it. And so how do we forgive when something happens to us? By forgetting about it, by taking it out of our system. And so forgetfulness is how we can forgive someone. And if we keep on remembering what we thought brought pain into our lives, then the pain just keeps on getting more and more and more. It's just like if you have a wound, and you every day you check the wound and you check the wound and you're checking the wound. By touching it, it's never going to heal. You need to let it get out of your system. And so if we don't forget and we keep on focusing our attention on those arenas which bring pain to us, then those states are going to make our life much more difficult. And saints and mystics are always asking us to love everybody. It's easier said than done. But when we look at the lives of the great saints, we find examples after examples of how people came to persecute them, but they still had love for them. And so when we take the name of the Master and it comes to our lips and our attention goes to the Master, then our attention is away from everything else. Many of us in this last century had a chance to be physically in the presence of Sant Kripal Singh Ji Maharaj or Sant Darshan Singh Ji Maharaj. And we might have had many difficulties, and when we saw these great masters, when we were in their presence, all of a sudden it seemed like the difficulties had evaporated. Why? Because our attention is transported to another area. And it's like, let's say you're going for an operation. And for operation, you need to be sedated. You're under anesthesia. And so when you're under anesthesia, your physical consciousness, that attention has been removed from your body. So the surgeon can come in and he can cut. He can cut a part of the skin, he can get the ribs, he can get to the heart, he can maneuver the other parts of our body, the other organs. But we don't feel anything. Why? Because our attention is not in that arena. And the same thing happens when our attention is in the Master. Because our attention is in that arena which is full of joy and happiness. So whatever else is there is not bringing any difficulties to us. A disciple of the Lord is in difficulties. Who does he remember? He remembers the Lord. He remembers God's name. He repeats the names of God. And as we repeat the names of God, what happens? Our attention goes to God. And as our attention goes to the Creator, there could be nothing better than that. We are with the source of all happiness and joy. We realize that God is with us. And when we realize that God is with us, then we're all powerful. Nothing can bother us then. When we know God is on our side and God is with us, then how can anything be painful to us? How can anything bring any difficulties to us? And so when we think about repeating God's name or bringing God's name to our lips, and that's what Simran is all about. Simran, repeating God's name mentally, so that our attention gets focused on God. It's very interesting through these verses how the spiritual path gets revealed. Like repeating God's name is like an antidote to any difficulty. It's the medication which removes all kinds of difficulties. And saints and mystics, when you look at their lives, in the face of all kinds of calamities at the physical level, their attention would always be to God. Their prayers would always be to God, not for any destruction for anyone else, but for forgiveness for the people who brought difficulties into their life. Much affects us when we know if we are stable or we are not stable. If we know that God loves us, then we're all powerful, we're very happy. If we feel that God does not love us or God does not like us, which happens when we do something wrong, then we start to feel, well, I did something wrong. So maybe I'm going through a punishment because God maybe is not forgiving me or something. It's in those stages that the pain gets more and more and more. And what is very interesting is that the simple words of the saints and mystics of like thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago, are now being born through the scientific experimentation. There was a study done in Amsterdam by the University of Amsterdam and the Leiden University. It's a very interesting survey. They took 27 people, 18 women and 9 men, and they did this survey with them. They asked each one of them to give their photographs. So each one of them gave their photographs. And they were told that these photographs will be sent to some students in another university. And then they said, once the students have got it, we are going to call you to the laboratory. And then the face of the person to whom we sent your photograph is going to come on the computer. And then that person will tell you if they like you based on your photograph or not. So that was the study. Scientists do all kinds of studies. So this was the study. But the results were very interesting. So what they did is on one day, they got all the photographs. They got all these, 27 people in a lab. And they sat them in front of computers, each one separately. This is what they told them, but that is not what they did. They just told them that. Instead, they had the computer take out randomly some picture of someone and put one on one person and one another one on. They also randomly let the computer say whether that person likes them or not. Just random. But they want to see what the reaction would be. And so it's very interesting. As the photograph of the person was shown, the heartbeat, and then they put heart monitors, the heartbeats of everyone started to go down. Because they were in anticipation whether the person on the other side is going to like them or not. So the heartbeat went down. And they let them wait for 4-5 minutes before getting an answer, So they could measure everything, and the heartbeat went down. And it's going down and down. As time is going by, it's sinking. And then, for the first person, the answer came back that person who's photographing doesn't like you. And the heart rate went still down, went lower. And the person who said that they like you, all of a sudden the heart rate went back to normal very quickly. But the persons whose response was that they weren't liked, their heart stayed low for very long periods of time. And it is very interesting how, emotionally, the effect of what we think others think of us puts in our life. And so when we start to think of it, if we feel the presence of God around us, then we behave very, very nicely. When we go to places of worship, how reverential are we? How nicely do we talk to everyone there? How do we bring a big, smile on our face as we're talking? And as soon as we're out of that area, does our behavior remain the same? Because many of us think, okay, that the God is in this place of worship, and so we go there and we are very, very reverential and very good and very forgiving, and all of a sudden we are out and we're like a tyrant. We change dramatically. Why? Because the feeling of God being in our presence makes us be a better human being. So when we repeat God's name, what happens? Then we feel that God is with us at all times. We're repeating God's name. The presence of the Lord is there. And that makes us, our life, be lived in a manner in which it should be lived. It's the difficulties of our surroundings that make us also leave the piousness of a perfect life. It's our interactions with those who we are surrounded with. It's the activities that are happening in our life that make us think as if things are happening to what we want or not happening to what we want. And whenever things are happening contrary to what we want, which happens many, many times, because we live in a very diverse culture these days. There are people from all kinds of cultures and backgrounds living in the same towns. The understandings are different, the way of talking is different, the way of behaving is different. And so our expectations of what we expect from someone else are not met, and then we get disillusioned. And then we get pained. And we think that someone is purposely bringing that pain to us, and that bothers us, and we don't forgive. We want to retaliate. But those who do that are the ones who create trouble. When you throw a pebble into a pond, its waves ripple till the end of the pond. And so it's the same thing with not forgiving anyone. The pain that remains there lingers on and on and on and on, and then never ends and never stops. When we come to think of it, life is very, very short. 50, 60, 80, 100 years is not a long time. And we're all here with different roles. It's just like we're all in like one movie. Each one has been given a character to play. One day, we're all going to be leaving this human body, this human existence. And we all need to make use of this existence to get to our goals. If we just squander away all the time that we have in like petty differences and petty things and that really don't help us any, that actually keep us from getting to our goals, which is to know God, to be one with God, then all of this time and opportunity to be in the human body is wasted. So if we remember to forgive, and if we remember to forget is good, then we will find that life would be lived very calmly and peacefully.